as my presentation is coming on top of the laptop, I just wanted to congratulate NIN for this centenary event. It's fabulous to see this and to be a part of this. I graduated from MSU Baroda, and some of us, or several of us, thought we would be working at this institute eventually. So it's an honor. But I also want to take this moment to, we are in India, we are at NIN, and I want to take this moment to remember and honor someone who we lost this year, Professor Prakash Shetty, who several of us in this room know, and he would have been delighted to be here, I'm sure. His heart was always in India, and so it was in UK as well, I might add. And he was an eminent scientist and a formal or an informal mentor to several of us. So on this day, I do miss him very much, and several of us do. And if you haven't heard of him or read his work, I suggest you do, and there are several pieces in the journals honoring him as well. With that, I just wanted to go on to my presentation. I'm Suneetha Kadiyala. I'm at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. And my topic is really shifting gears in everything you heard before, and I'm going to talk about innovations in methods and metrics. What is it that we have learned in the last 10 years in terms of how we do research in a complex and interdisciplinary topic such as food systems, agriculture, nutrition, health, and environment. So obviously, it's a very vast field. I'm only going to scratch the surface, and I'm happy to talk to you. I have to rush out right after my talk, but you feel free to email me. So we have made a lot of progress globally around the world in terms of reducing undernutrition. I wanted to put it out there. Except for Eastern and Central Africa and West Africa, we have seen large declines in undernutrition, but high geographic inequities persist, as this slide shows. And there are high socioeconomic inequities as well. If you look at this graph, even among the highest, wealth quintile, which is the orange dots here, the kids in these highest health quintiles are still stunted. About 20% of them are. This is from the Global Nutrition Report 2016. And if you look at the urban and rural areas, you would see a similar trend. Even in urban areas, you see high rates of undernutrition still, and somewhat unexpectedly, but you do that. So while we are making progress, we still have a lot of work to do. We know that poor diets are a big risk factor, right? Poor diets are the top risk factor for disease. This is slightly dated. The global burden of disease, the latest estimates were released on Friday, and I didn't have time to really get the right graph. But regardless, it basically says similar things, that poor diets are the top risk factor for disease. But diets are modifiable. Are they modifying in the right direction? Let's see. This is a graph from David Stuckler and colleagues from PLOS Medicine in 2012. And what do we see here? We see that the diets in low-income and middle-income countries are tracking along high-income countries, as Uma said a while before. So if you look at packaged foods, soft drinks, processed foods, oils, and so on and so forth, all the bad foods, the consumption is increasing. We are consuming more perishable goods. That means populations are, on average, having more milk, meat, as well as more purchased foods, more processed foods. So some things are happening right, but a lot of things are also not happening right. What do we do with this? We know that income growth, it does reduce undernutrition. We know from this graph that a 10% increase in GDP per capita can lead to 6% reductions in stunting. This is from 2013. But however, when you don't have nutrition goals to your income growth, look what could happen. Income growth can lead to unintended consequences. So what you see here is a 10% increase in GDP per capita can lead to 7% increase, more than reductions in stunting, in overweight and obesity among adult females here in this on the y-axis. So clearly, income growth is a part of the story, but it is not the entire story, as we heard this morning. Given that there has been an increased attention to underlying determinants of undernutrition, This is a modified UNICEF conceptual framework published by Butta et al. In 2013, and I'm pretty sure, 100% sure, that all of you are familiar with that. Within this context, several sectors have received attention, particularly agriculture and food systems, women's empowerment, although we don't nearly talk enough about where do men fit in the context of women's empowerment, and hygiene and sanitation have received substantial interest since the beginning of this decade. With our understanding of how nutrition plays out, what determines nutrition status of a person, our international goal setting has also changed. If you remember in MDG 1, and reduction in undernutrition was just one of the indicators for MDG 1, to the whole of WHO targets on nutrition, to SDG 2, where actually the whole goal itself is about reducing all forms of malnutrition, not for just children, not for just adolescent girls and pregnant mothers, but to everyone in the populations, including older people. So this is quite an aspirational goal, and we have just 12 years. So that makes me very strained, and not just 15 minutes here, but the 12 years also seems quite challenging task ahead of us. And we have to do all this in a rapidly changing landscape. We heard this morning about the importance of environment. Alan was talking about issues of undertaking, considering water footprints in the context of climate change, environmental fragility. There is more migration and conflict. Again, global burden of disease points to the alarming rates of mortality due to conflict. There is rapid urbanization, but there is also rapid rural transformation. It's not like everyone is moving into cities. They're doing that, but rural areas are not static meanwhile. They're also changing in a number of ways. And changing food system governance. We heard Anurag passionately talk about WTO, but that is really food system governance at its highest levels. That determines what we eat or we do not eat. And so we need to take all these things into consideration as we are really talking about agriculture food systems for nutrition. So the two big questions we have ahead of us are: how do we make our agriculture food systems sustainable, healthy to all people in this rapidly transforming context? And how do we make nutritious diets physically, economically accessible in an equitable and just way? We don't nearly talk of equity, or we really don't talk of food justice and social justice in this context. And I think it needs to be on the agenda as well. So, clearly, the world is responding, the research community has responded, the NGO community, the international donors and UN agencies, governments have all been responding to this challenge. There has been an increased momentum to inform action. And three things have happened in this context in the last 10 years, I would say. One is the development of conceptual frameworks and pathways. This is just one of them that I was involved in, but there are several others that have also developed conceptual pathways and frameworks, and the importance of these is they set an agenda, they set a way of thinking in empirically undertaking this work in a systematic way. So this has happened. And aided by these kinds of conceptual frameworks and pathways, what we see is a lot of evidence generation. In the first era, in the early 2010 and to 2012, there have been a lot of systematic reviews on what is it that we know about this topic, what can we learn as we move ahead, right? We need to learn from history. So, and then was evidence generation of existing data sets, using existing data sets, collecting new data, and so on and so forth. So what do we know about the 10 years of this effort now? We know that there's a relationship between agriculture production, income, and diets, whether they're in the context of correlations or in the context of RCTs. We also see impacts on wasting and anemia, but we are not seeing impacts on stunting as much as we would like to. And why is that? There could be several reasons, and I posit some here. One is, are we intervening too late? Do we know that the pregnant mother is too late? You know, we know by the time that the woman is pregnant, well, I mean, she's already in her third trimester for the most part. So maybe we are intervening too late. Our colleague Andrew Prentice tells us that actually epigenetics play an important role. And in fact, I heard him present at a recent conference saying that father's nutrition status at the time of conception predicts height for age z-scores of the child, or something to that effect. Please do not quote me on that. Only Andrew can talk about the complex epigenetics. But my point is that so many things do play an important part, and that starts before conception, on how the parents of the child have been nourished. So there is a concern about timelines, and I keep saying this because I do run a very complex RCT called OPA1, funded by Gates and DFID in Orissa, where it's a 4-arm cluster randomized controlled trial, and it's a 4-year intervention. Most interventions of this multisectoral nature are 4 to 5 years. Multisectoral interventions, regardless of how beautiful a proposal you write and you think you have figured out, by the time you sit with 7 or 8 organizations and expertise, it takes a year just to roll out the intervention. And then you've intervened for 32 months and it's time for evaluation. So maybe we are not giving enough time for the intervention to mature and transform the context. But what gives us the hope is that the pathways to impact, like the diet, swim permits, empowerment, etc., are all positively affected. Markets, I don't remember, more than 70% of the food consumed comes from markets, even in the subsistence agriculture context. And apparently I don't have enough time. I only have 5 minutes, so I won't go into the evidence base. But you just have to take it from me that we're learning more and more about the importance of markets, and researching on food markets or improving market linkages or intervening in the markets, whatever it means, is just in its infancy. And again, we are doing a study on market aggregation and improving that and what it means for nutrition. And it's still in infancy. The way we think every day changes because it's quite difficult to unpack all the pathways through which nutrition of the people we care about can be affected. There's been a concern about time use, and are we, as we intervene as researchers or NGOs or governments, we ask women to do more and more. Are we placing more burden on women? And our systematic review tells us, yes, the time burden on women increases, but actually the impacts on nutrition is much more ambiguous, and it depends on a lot of factors. So that's good news. If we take these factors into consideration, we might be able to come up with intervention models that where we do not do harm at the very least. And then we are now stepping out of disciplinary comfort zones. You heard 2 nutritionists talk here about food governance and WTO. You heard about agriculture people talk about nutrition. We heard about Alan talking about environment. So we are stepping out of our disciplinary zones and working more and more together. But to do so, we need methods and metrics. We need new tools in our toolbox in order to understand these complex linkages. And that's where I lead a program called the Innovative Methods and Metrics for Agriculture and Nutrition Action, IMANA, funded by DFID. And I won't go into the details. Please, you're welcome to look at the website, but it's mostly really about improving methods and metrics, but also building capacity in understanding each other and use of those metrics. These are some of the examples. When I say methods and metrics in agriculture and nutrition research, it's a very obtuse term to understand. So I wanted to put some, give you a little bit of an idea about what that means. And because of, again, lack of time, I cannot go into, I thought I'll give you a couple of examples, but I will not be able to do that. All this to say, all these methods, that means how do we use new analytical approaches, or how do we create new indices, they're all undertaken by interdisciplinary researchers, sociologists, hydrologists, nutritionists, coming together to create that water insecurity scale, right? Who would have thought a hydrologist would work with a nutritionist? So these are the real examples. It is doable, and we are all doing it, and several of us in this room are involved in doing or being a part of these endeavors. The final thing I want to talk about is the Agriculture, Nutrition and Health Academy under Imana. It's a global network of agriculture people interested or working on these linkages. And we have several activities. And the one activity that I would like to focus here is on the Academy Week, which is our face-to-face learning, face-to-face event that we have once a year. And these are the 3 that have happened. But the next one is going to be in India, and I'm hoping it's going to be in Hyderabad. So I would come and talk to some of you later at this point. So it's going to be in June 2019, and we really hope that you can sign up and come to this conference. And I'll skip on this webinar we have with the Africa Nutrition Society. So we also convene something called the technical working groups under the Academy. And the purpose of these technical working groups is again to take some of these obtuse constructs and really operationalize them in the context of low and middle income countries. Some of them are already under research. In high income countries, they might need to be adapted. So these are the global experts from various disciplines coming together to push a research agenda on this topic. Again, what does that mean? So we have these working groups on food environment, sustainable diets, food safety, time use metrics, and economic evaluation. So we have produced 3 reports, and 1 article is going to be published soon, and the economic evaluation one is currently ongoing. So I'll skip this and I'll come to the food environment part of it. Just want to say that this is a policy game that you can play when you have difficult trade-offs from different stakeholders. Then you do need to bring them together somehow to understand those trade-offs. So it's a policy game that's developed. And increasingly, you are hearing a terminology that is thrown around or used called the food environments. And it's really important to understand and tease out and unpack what we mean by that before we come up with a new jargon. So what we did is to bring together experts. That's food environments. It can mean anything, right? So we brought experts in the field to really help us think through what a food environment means or could mean, and how do we really think about researching and understanding food environments. And this is how we have done. We said there's an external domain and a personal domain, and that it is the interface between food systems and a person. It's food acquisition. And it's published, and you're welcome to download the article. It's free, open access in Global Food Security. I think it was a couple of months ago. So while all these new things are nice and sexy, the old methods and metrics also require a lot of attention. For example, coverage and quality of data on food consumption, as we heard before, diet quality, so on and so, biomarkers for micronutrient status. All these still need a lot of momentum and attention as well. So finally, I just want to say that low diet intake is a key modifiable risk factor, and we do need to demand, and we are demanding much more of our agriculture food systems. We are making progress, but we do need to have better tools in our toolbox, and here are some of the examples. I just want to end again with really thinking through the new constructs. For example, my last bullet point was really about food governance and understanding conflict of interest and equity, and ways of thinking about and analyzing this data. With that, I just want to say, please do come to the ANH Academy conference, and the call for abstracts is released, and it's also free. Please become a member. Thank you very much, and thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Suneetha.